Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a fascinating, high-stakes case study from the world of global business. A story about a company so big, so dominant, that its operational hiccups sent shockwaves across the entire tech industry. Apple. Do you know that Apple, the most valuable company in the world, lost an estimated $1.5 billion in Black Friday sales in 2022? Yes, $1.5 billion lost in a single crucial sales weekend, all because of iPhone supply constraints. It's mind-boggling, right? Think about that for a second. 1 in 3 retail stores across the US and Europe were experiencing stock-outs of the new iPhone 14 Pro. In China, a market vital for both sales and production, sales were down by more than 30% year-on-year. By the end of 2022, Apple's stock had dropped a staggering 29%. These weren't just bad days at the office. They were a massive, flashing red signal that the supply chain model that had made Apple an operational marvel for over a decade was finally breaking down. This wasn't just an internal problem. It was a reflection of a deglobalizing world. This episode is not just a deep dive into an operational challenge. It's a masterclass in how a global titan navigates a new era of risk. To understand the crisis, we first have to understand Apple's competitive advantage. For years, Apple's supply chain wasn't just good. It was legendary, largely thanks to the operational genius of Tim Cook before he became CEO. Speed and scale. Apple pioneered the concept of a highly centralized, lean supply chain. By consolidating manufacturing, primarily in China, they achieved an unmatched speed to market and colossal economies of scale. No one could manufacture a new product as fast and as cheaply on a global scale as Apple. Vertical integration in design. Apple maintains tight control over its product design, including the core chips, the Apple Silicon. This vertical integration allows for unprecedented product performance and differentiation, something Android competitors struggle to match. They don't just order parts, they design the very soul of the device. Negative cash-to-cash cycle. This is the operational holy grail. Apple sells its products and collects cash before it has to pay its suppliers. This not only makes their inventory management world-class, but also generates massive, free-flowing cash that fuels their innovation. However, this highly efficient, centralized model came with an immense risk. Massive dependency on a single geographic region. Geographic concentration. China. Over 90% of Apple's iPhones, iPads, and Macs were being assembled in China, mainly by Foxconn. This was the source of their speed, but also their single point of failure. Component specialization. While Apple designs its own chips, it still relies on a small, highly specialized group of global suppliers for other critical components like advanced displays and memory chips. A hiccup with one key supplier can freeze an entire production line. In 2022, 3 major global events converged to brutally expose the fragility of this centralized model. The Chinese government's strict zero-COVID policy led to massive, unpredictable lockdowns, shutting down entire cities and industrial zones, including the massive Foxconn facility in Zhengzhou, often called iPhone City. Unbearable factory conditions. The lockdowns made factory working conditions incredibly difficult. Workers were forced to live and work on site in a closed-loop system, which led to significant worker unrest and, critically, in the second half of 2022, massive worker attrition. Simply put, there weren't enough people to build the iPhones, even if the parts were available. This was the most direct cause of the Black Friday sales loss. The pandemic's aftermath already saw a global shortage of semiconductors and other critical electronic components, the very components Apple needs. The simultaneous high demand and low supply created a pressure cooker. The Russia-Ukraine War. This conflict spurred an unprecedented global energy crisis and double-digit inflation, which drove up the costs of raw materials, energy, and global logistics. This directly eroded Apple's usually robust profit margins. Rising geopolitical tensions. The ongoing U.S.-China trade tensions introduced regulatory and tariff risks, making the long-term heavy reliance on China unsustainable from a political and commercial standpoint. The reality was clear. The world was deglobalizing. Supply chain disruptions and rising geopolitical risk were not temporary problems. They were the new normal. Apple had to transform, but the transition was fraught with difficult trade-offs and would take years to complete. Apple's leadership, led by Tim Cook, faced two fundamental questions that would redefine the company's future value chain. This was the question of diversification and continuity. The challenge: how do you re-engineer a global value chain that took decades to build without hurting manufacturing continuity, product quality, revenue, and, most importantly, profitability? The trade-off: the short-term pain of moving production, higher initial costs, slower ramp-up, quality control issues, versus the long-term resilience of a distributed network. They had to move production gradually without interrupting the flow of their flagship products. This was the question of control versus flexibility. Option A: further vertical integration. Should Apple double down on its strategy by further driving vertical integration in the design of components like chips, semiconductors, and screens? This offers maximum control, differentiation, and performance. Real-time. Example: investing billions into designing their own 5G modem chip to replace Qualcomm, or in-house micro-LED screens for future Apple Watches. Option B: the Android model, broader supplier base. Should Apple adopt the Android phone manufacturer's model, like Samsung or Xiaomi, and develop a broader, more dispersed base of suppliers for components? This offers greater flexibility and reduces the risk of one supplier failure. The trade-off: this sacrifices some control and design advantage for increased redundancy and market leverage over suppliers. Apple decided to retain its core China operations for its high efficiency while building significant secondary hubs in other countries. This is the China Plus One strategy, mitigating the single-country risk. India, the assembly powerhouse. Apple made a massive push to establish India as its secondary global iPhone assembly hub. Partners like Foxconn and Pegatron rapidly ramped up operations. Real-time example: by the end of 2023, it was reported that over 14% of all iPhones were being assembled in India, up from just a single-digit percentage a few years prior. The long-term goal is reportedly to assemble 25% of all iPhones in India by 2025. Vietnam, the non-iPhone hub. Vietnam became a crucial assembly center for non-iPhone products. Real-time example: AirPods, Apple Watches, and even MacBooks saw increased production in Vietnam, diversifying the risk for the entire product portfolio and keeping those high-value assembly lines away from the main iPhone hub risk. Beyond geography, Apple applied tactical changes to increase resilience. Dual sourcing for critical components. For key components, Apple began deliberately dual sourcing, meaning using two different suppliers, often in different regions, for the same part. Example: if a display supplier in Korea experiences an earthquake-related shutdown, a secondary supplier in Japan or Taiwan can pick up the slack, ensuring continuity. Increased automation and supplier audits. Apple invested heavily in factory automation to reduce reliance on mass human labor, mitigating the risk of labor shortages and unrest like the one seen at Foxconn. They also dramatically increased the frequency and rigor of their supplier accountability audits concerning labor standards and environmental compliance, a proactive move to manage ethical and operational risk. Regarding the vertical integration dilemma, Apple chose to double down on its core vertical integration, Option A, while using strategic diversification for commodity components, a version of Option B. Core chip and design control. Apple continued to pour resources into its custom silicon, M-series and A-series chips. This is non-negotiable, as it is the primary source of their product advantage. No risk mitigation is worth sacrificing this core competency. Strategic supplier. Breadth. For less strategic, more commoditized components, they expanded their supplier list to create flexibility and leverage. They diversified who provides things like chassis, cables, and certain memory types, essentially creating a competitive tension between suppliers to maintain cost efficiency and quality even as they move production. What we've seen in this Apple case study is a masterclass in strategic adaptation. The $1.5 billion Black Friday loss was the price of a lesson, but it forced a transformation that will define the company's supply chain for the next decade. Let's quickly revisit our key learning objectives and see what we can take away. Apple's journey from a single point of failure to a distributed, resilient network proves that even the most optimized system in the world must constantly evolve with the geopolitical and economic landscape. This case study is a vital reminder for all of us, whether you're running a small e-commerce business or a multinational corporation. Efficiency is essential, but resilience is mandatory. In a deglobalizing world, your supply chain isn't just a cost center. It's your single greatest source of competitive risk and long-term advantage. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive. If you learned something new, hit that like button, subscribe for more strategic breakdowns, and let me know in the comments. Where do you think Apple should open its next major manufacturing hub? See you next time.